On a chilly evening in 1969, millions of Americans were glued to their television sets, waiting to watch Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. At that time, television was the centerpiece of American culture, and appearing on it was the ultimate mark of success for any entertainer. On this particular night, the audience had no idea that they were about to witness a performance that would be remembered for decades. Tiny Tim, a tall man with long curls, striking clothing and a falsetto voice that could pierce through any room, took the stage with his ukulele. Unlike the other guests, he was not a mainstream pop star or a household name, yet his presence was impossible to ignore. As he began to sing Tiptoe Through the Tulips, some audience members laughed nervously, others stared in amazement, and a few simply shook their heads in disbelief. Tiny Tim's performance was unusual, even bizarre to some, but it was undeniably captivating. People could not stop watching because his combination of a high-pitched voice, eccentric dress, and old-fashioned music was something entirely new to television. However, this performance was not just an isolated act of entertainment. It was the beginning of a sequence of events that would eventually lead to Tiny Tim being permanently banned from The Tonight Show. Behind his quirky appearance and odd performance choices, there were elements of his personality and personal life that made television executives uncomfortable. While the American public was curious and amused, network executives and some critics questioned whether his unpredictability could ever fit into a show that depended on timing, familiarity, and control humor. On that night, Tiny Tim was more than just a performer. He became a symbol of something different, something that could not be easily categorized. His eccentricity was both his charm and, ultimately, the reason his appearances became controversial. The Tonight Show audience witnessed a man whose passion for music and showmanship was evident in every note, yet there was also a sense of unpredictability that made the situation tense. Even Johnny Carson, known for his wit and composure, had moments of visible surprise. The performance was captivating, unique, and slightly unsettling, leaving viewers to wonder who this man really was and what he represented in the broader landscape of entertainment. This one night, with millions watching, marked a turning point in both Tiny Tim's career and the history of television entertainment, highlighting the thin line between admiration for talent and discomfort with unconventional behavior. The Tonight Show, a stage that had launched countless entertainers into mainstream success, became, for Tiny Tim, a place where his quirks and brilliance collided with societal expectations in a way that was both fascinating and controversial. His 1969 performance encapsulated everything that made him different: the music, the visual appearance, the unpredictable personality, and a willingness to push boundaries. In retrospect, this night was not just about a song or a performance. It was about introducing an entirely new type of artist to a mass audience, and it set the stage for both fame and challenges that Tiny Tim would face in the years to come. Tiny Tim, born Herbert Cowrie on April 12, 1932, in Manhattan, New York City, grew up in a world that was vastly different from the one most children of his time experienced. His family background was unique. His father worked in textiles, and his mother was an immigrant from Eastern Europe. From an early age, Herbert displayed a fascination with music that went far beyond casual interest. While other children played games outdoors, he spent hours exploring records, sheet music, and photographs in the New York Public Library. One of the most pivotal moments in his childhood occurred when his father gave him a 78 revolutions per minute record of Henry Burr's Beautiful Ohio. Listening to this song repeatedly, Herbert felt a deep emotional connection that went beyond simple enjoyment. He became completely enthralled by the feelings music could evoke, and by the age of 6, he was already teaching himself to play the guitar. As he grew, his musical taste expanded to include the ukulele, inspired by radio performances of Arthur Godfrey. Herbert's early musical education was largely self-directed, and it gave him an encyclopedic knowledge of early 20th century songs, composers, and performers. By the time he was a preteen, his knowledge of obscure music far surpassed that of many professional historians. Despite these talents, Herbert struggled in formal education. He attended George Washington High School, but traditional subjects like mathematics and physics did not capture his interest. His focus on music often alienated him from peers and teachers alike. He eventually dropped out of school, a decision that concerned his parents but ultimately allowed him to devote himself entirely to his musical ambitions. Early adulthood was marked by odd jobs, each taken merely to make ends meet while he continued to refine his musical skills. One of his most defining discoveries was the use of falsetto, influenced by listening to 1920 singer Rudy Vallee. Herbert described his vocal technique as a holy experience, recognizing that it gave him a unique voice that no other performer possessed. He experimented with stage names, trying several before finally adopting the moniker Tiny Tim, inspired by the delicate yet optimistic character in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The irony of the name suited a man who was unusually tall, standing at 6 feet 1 inch, and whose personality and appearance defied conventional norms. Along with the name came an entirely new persona. Long hair, bright clothing, powdered face, and a theatrical style that made him appear as if he stepped out of another era. Tiny Tim's early years, therefore, were a combination of intense musical study, personal eccentricity, and the gradual formation of the unusual stage persona that would later shock and captivate audiences nationwide. These experiences laid the foundation for his later rise to fame and helped define the qualities that made him both beloved and controversial. His passion for music was not just a career choice. It was an essential part of who he was, influencing every decision he made and shaping the eccentric, unforgettable performer that audiences would come to know to be by the late 1950s and early 1960s. Tiny Tim had begun performing in some of the most unusual venues in New York City, most notably Hubert's Museum and Live Flea Circus in Times Square. These venues, filled with sideshow acts, sword swallowers, and oddities, provided the perfect environment for his eccentric performances. Tiny Tim, often performing under names like Larry Love, sang old Tin Pan Alley songs in his signature falsetto. His appearance alone, long hair, white powdered face, and tall frame, made him stand out even among a crowd of human curiosities. It was during this period that he honed his ability to captivate an audience, learning to embrace his uniqueness rather than hide it. As he moved to Greenwich Village, he began performing at small clubs, open mic nights, and even cafes where emerging artists like Bob Dylan were making their names. These performances were often unpaid or compensated with food, but they allowed him to refine his skills and connect with audiences who appreciated his eccentric style. Tiny Tim's distinctive approach began to attract attention, and talent scouts noted his unusual combination of falsetto singing old-fashioned songs and theatrical flair. In February 1968, his television breakthrough came on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, a popular show known for its fast-paced humor and unpredictable guest appearances. Tiny Tim entered the studio with his ukulele and a shopping bag, performing Tiptoe Through the Tulips in his high falsetto. The audience's reaction was a mixture of laughter, amazement, and bewilderment, but by the end of the performance, he had captivated everyone's attention. This exposure led to a recording contract with Reprise Records, owned by Frank Sinatra, and the release of his debut album, God Bless Tiny Tim, which included a mixture of Tin Pan Alley classics, vaudeville songs, and original tracks. The album's standout hit, Tiptoe Through the Tulips, reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Tiny Tim became an overnight sensation. He began appearing regularly on television shows, including The Ed Sullivan Show and, most notably, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Despite his rising fame, mainstream audiences and critics often dismissed him as a novelty act, unable to recognize the artistry behind his performances. However, prominent figures like Bob Dylan, Andy Warhol, Bing Crosby, and Frank Sinatra saw him as a revivalist of forgotten American music. This period of fame was intense, with over 20 appearances on The Tonight Show, yet it also exposed him to scrutiny, controversy, and the beginning of tensions with television executives, foreshadowing the events that would lead to his permanent ban from Johnny Carson's program, point one of the most unforgettable moments in Tiny Tim's life and in television history, occurred on December 17, 1969, when he married Victoria Buetinger, known as Miss Vicky, live on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The event drew an astonishing 45 million viewers, roughly a quarter of the U.S. population at the time, making it the second most watched television event of the decade, behind only the moon landing. The wedding was unusual not only because it took place on a talk show, but also because of the age difference. Tiny Tim was 37, and Miss Vicky was just 17. Despite this, the ceremony became an iconic television moment, featuring Victorian-era costumes designed by Jeffrey Martin. 10,000 tulips imported from Holland to honor Tiny Tim's famous song Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and even a milk and honey toast instead of champagne to suit the couple's quirky preferences. Johnny Carson, known for his humor and composure, reassured viewers during his monologue that the wedding was real, emphasizing that the spectacle was genuine rather than a joke. Tiny Tim, always a showman, wanted the event to reflect his eccentric personality, and he made sure every detail, from costumes to stage decorations, was meticulously planned. For the audience, the wedding was more than entertainment. It was a spectacle of the unusual, a merging of pop culture, celebrity fascination, and performance art. Yet behind the spectacle, there were deeper controversies. Critics and segments of the public raised concerns about the significant age difference, while television executives were uncertain about how such an unprecedented live event might affect public perception and ratings. Despite these concerns, the wedding solidified Tiny Tim's status as a cultural phenomenon. It showcased his commitment to eccentricity and to creating moments that would be remembered forever. The marriage, however, did not endure. Within 8 years, Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky divorced after having one child, Tulip Victoria. The marriage, while short-lived, remains one of the most talked-about moments in both television and music history, illustrating Tiny Tim's fearless approach to life, entertainment, and performance. His decision to marry on live television reflected both his dedication to spectacle and his inability or unwillingness to separate personal milestones from public performance. While the wedding brought him fame, it also contributed to the scrutiny that eventually led network executives to question his ongoing suitability for mainstream television. Tiny Tim's life was a constant balancing act between genius and eccentricity, and this duality extended far beyond his performances. His personal habits were often as unusual as his music. He was obsessive about cleanliness, claiming that he showered 4 to 6 times a day and used only disposable paper towels to dry off. His oral hygiene regimen was equally meticulous, involving multiple daily brushings with a combination of Crest McLean's and Gleam toothpaste. He spent large sums of money on cosmetics and grooming products, not out of vanity, but because he had an intense love of beauty and a desire to surround himself with it. Tiny Tim's fascination with adult diapers, elaborate role-playing dinners, and other odd routines further cemented his reputation as a peculiar individual. These behaviors, while harmless, often made mainstream audiences and television producers uneasy. Even his eccentricity had a method. It was part of his larger persona as a performer who refused to conform to societal norms. He embraced his quirks publicly, making them part of his act, yet they were also reflections of his private personality. In addition, his approach to relationships was unconventional. He openly stated his intention to have affairs even while married, a perspective that shocked those close to him but was consistent with his personal principles. Tiny Tim's private life was intertwined with his public persona, and this blurred boundary created both fascination and controversy. On the one hand, audiences loved him for his unpredictability and uniqueness. On the other hand, executives and critics questioned whether such eccentricities could ever fit into a structured television environment. His unconventional habits and lifestyle choices, combined with his on-stage unpredictability, made him one of the most enigmatic figures in entertainment. These characteristics contributed to both his early rise and eventual difficulties in sustaining mainstream fame, revealing the tension between artistic individuality and the expectations of television audiences and producers. By the mid-1970s, the novelty that had propelled Tiny Tim to fame began to wane. Public taste shifted toward rock, disco, and mainstream pop, leaving his vaudeville-inspired performances increasingly out of place. Despite his extensive talent and musical knowledge, television appearances became less frequent, and he struggled to find a place in the mainstream music industry. In response, Tiny Tim attempted to take control of his career through independent ventures. In 1971, he founded Victim Records, a label named by combining his identity with that of his wife at the time, Miss Vicky. Unfortunately, the label's releases were commercial failures, producing only 5 singles that failed to gain traction. Shortly afterward, he launched Toilet Records, a label whose name reflected his feelings about the music industry and his career at the time. Tiny Tim continued to record albums, often for small international labels, but sales remained minimal. Despite these setbacks, he never abandoned performing. He embraced smaller venues, community halls, circuses, and even underground scenes where his eccentricity was celebrated. In particular, the punk rock subculture of the late 1970s and early 1980s appreciated his defiance of conventional norms, turning him into a cult figure. Tiny Tim also collaborated with experimental bands, such as Brave Combo, expanding his reach to audiences that value novelty, creativity, and unpredictability. These independent projects demonstrated his resilience and unwavering dedication to music, even when mainstream success eluded him. While his mainstream career declined, his passion for performing never diminished, showing a commitment to art over commercial validation. These years highlight a crucial aspect of Tiny Tim's character: his willingness to adapt, innovate, and persist despite public indifference and industry rejection. Despite the decline in mainstream popularity, Tiny Tim's passion for performance never wavered. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, he continued to play in a wide variety of venues, including community centers, small theaters, high school auditoriums, and even international locations. He embraced these smaller-scale performances, seeing them as opportunities to connect with audiences in a more personal and meaningful way. However, by the mid-1990s, his health had begun to deteriorate significantly. Tiny Tim suffered from multiple health conditions, including diabetes and congestive heart failure, which left his heart pumping at only 40% capacity. Despite doctors' warnings and advice to retire, he refused to stop performing. He believed that music was his life's purpose, and giving it up was never an option. On September 28, 1996, at the Uke Expo in Monig, Massachusetts, he performed before a crowd of 135 fans at the age of 64. During the performance, he struggled physically but remained determined to complete his set, demonstrating an unwavering dedication to his art. Just a few months later, on November 30th, 1996, he attended a benefit concert for a local women's club in Minneapolis. Even though his wife, Susan, begged him to rest, he insisted on performing. That night, he tripped upon entering the venue and later collapsed during his performance. Paramedics were called, and despite their efforts, Tiny Tim passed away from cardiac arrest. His final moments, witnessed by a small audience, epitomized the way he lived his entire life, fully devoted to music and performing, regardless of the physical or personal cost. Tiny Tim's unwavering commitment to his craft, even in the face of significant health challenges, highlights a central aspect of his personality. He was a performer to the very end. Unlike many artists who retire or step away from the stage as they age, Tiny Tim prioritized music over personal comfort, fame, or societal expectations. His perseverance in the face of adversity ensured that his passion remained intact, leaving a legacy of dedication, creativity, and authenticity that continues to inspire musicians, performers, and fans worldwide. Tiny Tim's most iconic song, Tiptoe Through the Tulips, has transcended decades and genres, leaving a lasting impact on music, television, and popular culture. Originally composed by Joe Burke and Al Dubin in 1929 and first performed by Nick Lucas, the song was a sweet, romantic ballad celebrating love and whimsy. Tiny Tim's 1968 performance on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In transformed it completely. His ukulele accompaniment and high-pitched falsetto turned the previously gentle song into something uniquely eccentric, giving it an otherworldly charm that captivated viewers. The song became his signature, instantly recognizable and inseparable from his persona. Over the years, it has appeared in numerous films, television shows, and advertisements, often used to evoke nostalgia, innocence, or, in some cases, unsettling tension. For example, modern horror films such as Insidious utilize Tiny Tim's rendition in juxtaposition with frightening visuals, creating a deliberately dissonant effect that heightens the viewer's sense of unease. Similarly, cartoons and media parodies have referenced the song, ensuring that it remains a part of the cultural lexicon long after Tiny Tim's death. Beyond its presence in media, Tiptoe Through the Tulips represents a bridge between musical eras. It connects the popular music of the 1920s with the countercultural experimentation of the 1960s. Tiny Tim's performance brought forgotten music back into public consciousness, demonstrating the enduring power of old songs when interpreted through a distinctive artistic lens. The song also exemplifies Tiny Tim's broader contribution to music, his ability to make the past accessible, engaging, and even challenging for contemporary audiences. Its enduring popularity, adaptability, and emotional resonance ensure that Tiny Tim's influence will persist, shaping how future generations encounter and interpret both vintage and contemporary music. Despite his immense talent and dedication, Tiny Tim's career faced significant challenges, including eventual exclusion from mainstream television. While he appeared frequently on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson during the late 1960s and early 1970s, a combination of factors led to his permanent ban. Some of these were linked to public perception. Audiences were sometimes unsure if his eccentric behavior was genuine or a performance, while network executives feared controversy and declining ratings. Specific incidents, including his televised wedding to a 17-year-old bride, further complicated his relationship with television producers, who worried about backlash and legal considerations. Additionally, Tiny Tim's relentless unconventionality, his falsetto voice, unusual costumes, personal quirks, and unpredictable stage behavior made it difficult for him to maintain a consistent mainstream audience. While Johnny Carson personally admired Tiny Tim, valuing his artistry and charisma, the network ultimately decided that his appearances could no longer be sustained without risk. In a sense, this ban reflects a tension between true artistic individuality and commercial television constraints. Tiny Tim refused to conform to expectations or compromise his identity, even when doing so might have secured further fame or income. Over time, this made him more of a cult figure than a mainstream celebrity, celebrated by devoted fans who appreciate his authenticity while criticized or dismissed by broader audiences. Despite this, his legacy is undeniable. Tiny Tim influenced generations of performers, inspiring them to embrace uniqueness and challenge societal norms in music, performance, and personal expression. His work has been studied by music historians, cited by contemporary artists, and honored in documentaries exploring the countercultural movement of the 1960s. Even without mainstream television appearances in his later years, Tiny Tim's impact on American music and pop culture remains enduring, proving that true artistry cannot always be measured by ratings or mainstream approval. After his mainstream television appearances dwindled, Tiny Tim did not abandon his music or his fans. In fact, he embraced the opportunities available outside conventional media, performing in smaller venues, independent festivals, and underground shows. He became a beloved figure in subcultures that appreciated eccentricity, novelty, and authenticity. For example, the punk and avant-garde communities, who value defiance of social norms and unconventional art, found inspiration in Tiny Tim's distinctive style. While younger audiences may have initially regarded him as a curiosity, his deep knowledge of music, flawless ukulele playing, and theatrical performance gradually earned admiration from musicians and aficionados alike. He also collaborated with experimental groups like Brave Combo, exploring unusual sounds, combining genres, and maintaining a level of artistic experimentation that most mainstream artists avoided. His ability to transition from commercial success to underground icon reflects a resilience and adaptability rare in performers, especially those whose public image was defined by eccentricity. Tiny Tim's enduring presence in the music world, despite the decline in chart success, showcases his devotion to his craft and his willingness to challenge conventional expectations. Even in small-town theaters or local community events, he treated every performance as a chance to connect, entertain, and share the music he loved. His persistent touring, willingness to engage with unique audiences, and openness to creative experimentation cemented his status as a cult figure and allowed his influence to extend far beyond the commercial hits of his early career. Tiny Tim's personal life was as unconventional and fascinating as his professional career. His romantic relationships, habits, and lifestyle choices often defied societal norms, reflecting a man deeply committed to living authentically. His first marriage, to Victoria Miss Vicky Buetinger, occurred on live television when she was only 17 and he was 37, sparking both fascination and controversy. Though the marriage lasted 8 years and produced a daughter, to Victoria, it ultimately ended in divorce. Tiny Tim's subsequent marriages, first to John Alvis and later to Susan Marie Gardner, were brief or unconventional, further highlighting his individualistic approach to love and commitment. He often approached relationships with his own moral and emotional code, prioritizing freedom, creativity, and personal expression over traditional expectations. Beyond his romantic life, Tiny Tim maintained highly specific routines and habits, including rigorous hygiene practices, obsessive cleanliness, and idiosyncratic spending on cosmetics, clothing, and musical instruments. He was fascinated with beauty, ritual, and precision in both his personal and professional life, sometimes to an extreme degree. While some observers saw these behaviors as eccentricities, they were also expressions of a deeply personal worldview that valued art, aesthetic, and ritual in daily life. These habits, combined with his public persona, created a figure who was impossible to categorize. Tiny Tim's uniqueness, whether in love, daily routines, or music, reflects a commitment to authenticity that defined every aspect of his life and left a lasting impression on everyone who encountered him. Tiny Tim continued performing until his final years, refusing to let age or health challenges diminish his dedication to music. Even as he faced declining physical strength and multiple medical conditions, he remained determined to play, sing, and entertain audiences, demonstrating an extraordinary devotion to his craft. His last performances, including the Uke Expo in Monig, Massachusetts, and benefit concerts in Minneapolis, showed both his vulnerability and his unwavering commitment to art. On November 30th, 1996, during a benefit performance, he tragically collapsed and passed away from cardiac arrest. Yet even in his final moments, he was living exactly as he had throughout his life, devoted to music and the joy it brought to himself and others. Tiny Tim's legacy is multifaceted. On one hand, he revitalized forgotten music from the early 20th century, bringing Tin Pan Alley songs, vaudeville tunes, and vintage melodies to a modern audience. On the other, his eccentric persona, unique falsetto voice, and performance style challenged the boundaries of entertainment, pushing audiences to reconsider what it meant to be an artist. While mainstream fame eventually faded, his cult following, influence on subcultures, and enduring impact on popular culture secured his place in history. Today, Tiny Tim is remembered not only for his peculiarities, but for his profound love of music, his creativity, and his willingness to live life on his own terms. Musicians, filmmakers, and performers continue to cite him as an inspiration, showing that his legacy extends far beyond chart rankings or television appearances. Tiny Tim's impact on music and popular culture is both unique and enduring. While many artists are remembered for chart-topping hits or mainstream acclaim, Tiny Tim's influence lies in his ability to challenge the status quo and preserve musical history. By performing songs from the 1920s and 1930s, he introduced entire generations to melodies and artists that might have otherwise been forgotten. His falsetto voice, ukulele performances, and theatrical style transformed these older songs into entirely new experiences, bridging the gap between past and present. Beyond music, his appearances on television, especially on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, pushed the boundaries of what audiences expected from entertainers. He became a symbol of eccentricity embraced by the counterculture of the 1960s, demonstrating that artistic expression need not conform to conventional norms. Tiny Tim's cultural significance also extends to modern media, where his performances are referenced in films, cartoons, and advertisements. Tiptoe Through the Tulips, for example, has evolved from a romantic ballad to a versatile cultural touchstone, used in settings ranging from comedy to horror. His dedication performance, coupled with his refusal to compromise his individuality, inspired countless musicians and performers to embrace uniqueness and authenticity. Tiny Tim's life and career remind us that influence is not always measured by popularity alone. Sometimes it is defined by the courage to be different, the persistence to perform against all odds, and the passion to honor art in its purest form. Tiny Tim's story offers valuable lessons about perseverance, creativity, and individuality. Throughout his life, he faced skepticism, criticism, and public misunderstanding, yet he remained committed to his vision of music and performance. His refusal to conform to mainstream expectations or compromise his artistic identity demonstrates a rare level of personal integrity. Even when health issues, declining fame, or public controversy threatened his career, he continued to perform, experiment, and innovate. Another lesson lies in the importance of authenticity. Tiny Tim's eccentricities, whether his falsetto voice, peculiar habits, or distinctive appearance, were never acts of deception. They were genuine reflections of his personality. In embracing these qualities, he taught audiences and fellow artists alike that true creativity thrives when it is honest and unrestrained. His story also highlights the power of passion and dedication. From the moment he first encountered music as a child to his final performance decades later, Tiny Tim devoted his life to the art he loved. This unwavering commitment allowed him to leave a lasting legacy that continues to inspire, entertain, and provoke thought. By studying his life, we learn that success is not only defined by popularity or wealth, but also by the courage to follow one's passion and the willingness to stand out in a world that often rewards conformity. In conclusion, Tiny Tim was more than a novelty act. He was a musical pioneer, a cultural icon, and a testament to the power of individuality. His high-pitched falsetto, ukulele, and love of early American songs created a unique artistic signature that continues to resonate with audiences today. He challenged the norms of performance, reminding viewers that true artistry often exists at the intersection of eccentricity and brilliance. His life story, from his humble beginnings in Manhattan to his rise to fame on national television and eventual cult status, reflects both the opportunities and challenges of living authentically in a world that often resists difference. While mainstream fame eventually faded, Tiny Tim's dedication to music, his willingness to embrace unconventional paths, and his ability to inspire others ensure that his influence endures. Modern artists, filmmakers, and musicians continue to reference his work, demonstrating that the lessons he embodied, creativity, courage, and authenticity, remain relevant. Tiny Tim's legacy is a celebration of individuality, a tribute to forgotten music, and an example of a life lived with passion, curiosity, and unwavering commitment to one's art. For generations to come, he will be remembered not just for his peculiar voice or unforgettable performances, but for the courage to be unapologetically himself, leaving a mark on music, culture, and the hearts of fans that will never fade. Tiny Tim's impact on music and pop culture is remarkable, not because he was a conventional superstar, but because he challenged norms and created an entirely new space for eccentric artistry. Unlike mainstream performers, Tiny Tim drew attention to a forgotten era of American music, reviving Tin Pan Alley songs, vaudeville classics, and early 20th century compositions that might have been lost to history. His performances combined theatrics, historical appreciation, and an unusual vocal technique that made old songs feel fresh and sometimes even bizarre to contemporary audiences. This combination of music and persona allowed him to leave a distinct mark on television, film, and live entertainment. Shows like The Tonight Show and Laugh-In introduced millions of viewers to a performer who defied expectations, blurring the line between comedy, novelty, and serious musical artistry. Tiny Tim's influence extended beyond the stage. He became a symbol of individuality and creative courage. In an era of conformity and mass-produced pop music, he demonstrated that success could be measured not only by record sales or awards, but also by the ability to captivate and inspire a unique audience. His signature song, Tiptoe Through the Tulips, remains a cultural icon, appearing in movies, television shows, and advertisements across generations. The song's transformation from a romantic ballad to a creepy, unsettling track in horror films like Insidious illustrates the way Tiny Tim's artistic interpretation reshaped public perception and gave the work a new life. Beyond entertainment, Tiny Tim also influenced fellow artists. Icons such as Bob Dylan, Frank Sinatra, and Andy Warhol recognize his dedication, passion, and the unusual depth of his musical knowledge. Even critics who initially dismissed him later acknowledge his role in preserving forgotten music traditions and inspiring creativity. Tiny Tim's life demonstrates that being unconventional can be a form of artistry itself. His personal eccentricities, whether his obsessive hygiene habits, unique fashion choices, or theatrical stage presence, were not mere quirks but extensions of his artistic expression. In addition, his willingness to embrace unconventional spaces, such as punk rock clubs, vaudeville revivals, and small community halls, showed his commitment to connecting with audiences regardless of fame or mainstream acceptance. Tiny Tim also left a lasting impression on television as a medium, demonstrating how live performances could create shared cultural moments. His televised wedding on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show remains one of the most watched events in television history, illustrating the power of personality, spectacle, and timing. He proved that a performer could be both memorable and polarizing, drawing massive attention while maintaining authenticity. Even decades after his peak fame, Tiny Tim's image and music continue to inspire artists and entertainers who wish to explore eccentricity, theatricality, or forgotten music forms. In essence, his career offers a roadmap for those who wish to break free from conventional molds, remain passionate, embrace uniqueness, and use your talents to both entertain and educate. Tiny Tim's enduring legacy is therefore not simply about novelty or oddity. It is about his unwavering commitment to music, his influence on popular culture, and his ability to leave an unforgettable mark on audiences through creativity, courage, and individuality. His life reminds us that being different is not only acceptable, but can be transformative, shaping art and culture in ways that are lasting and profound. After the height of his mainstream fame in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Tiny Tim's career entered a new, less conventional phase. Yet he remained committed to performing and sharing his music with audiences worldwide. As the music industry shifted toward rock, disco, and mainstream pop, Tiny Tim's vaudeville-inspired style and falsetto vocals were no longer in the spotlight. Record labels became hesitant to invest in him, and his previous momentum on national television diminished. However, instead of retiring or conforming to prevailing trends, he chose to pursue a more independent path, establishing small record labels like Victim Records and Toilet Records to release his music. Though these ventures were commercially unsuccessful, they showcased his determination to maintain creative control over his work and reflected his lifelong dedication to music. Tiny Tim also embraced performance spaces that were often overlooked by mainstream artists. He toured community centers, high school auditoriums, circuses, punk rock clubs, and LGBTQ+ venues, reaching audiences that appreciate his authenticity and eccentric charm. In many ways, these intimate and unconventional venues allowed him to connect with people more deeply than the flash of national television ever could. He also began collaborating with underground and experimental artists, such as the Texas band Brave Combo